Welcome back to Primitive Organic Garden today. This is going to be a real quick video just showing how I build raised beds for free. This raised bed here was not free, and I'm just showing that real quick for contrast. This was close to $200 in lumber, and it took 52 bags of soil. Most of those were 1 cubic foot bags to fill this. And you can see it's not even completely full to the rim. So total cost for this was, I don't know, $350, close to $400. It's all nice pressure treated lumber and all that, but with the price of lumber skyrocketing, I'm just not going to do this again. I have 20 something raised beds, and if I spent this much money on every one of them, that wouldn't be great. So I just want to show you all that first one, and then we're going to show how I build raised beds largely for free without buying $200 worth of lumber and various soils, compost, potting mixes. And I've seen no difference in terms of productivity between the two. These just look a lot nicer because you have the wood there. So this one here, I always put down cardboard whether or not I'm going to use actual lumber or logs, but see, the cardboard comes out a little bit further on this side than here because my weed problem isn't as bad on this side, but I always leave a little bit of an edge so the cardboard sticks out past the wood border. These are just oak logs from pruning some of the oak trees. I have massive oaks and they have to be pruned on a regular basis, and this wood was heavy because it was all fresh green oak wood. I would recommend using the freshest wood you can. It's less than ideal to use wood that's sat out and rotted for months or years. You can always tell the freshness of the wood based on its weight. Some of these logs were significantly heavy. I don't really put a whole lot of effort into trying to stack them in nice, neat, clean orders. I suppose if I were had more time and had more tools, I would probably try to stack this better so it looks more like a Lincoln log cabin or something instead of just kind of a mess. But once you have crops in the raised bed, their roots are gonna hold the soil in place for the most part. So even if the wood frame, and you can see it's not anchored at all. I mean, I put the really heavy logs around the edges normally. So you can see this has a probably 80 or 100 pound log there. This one was well over 100 pounds. And I don't really worry about cutting these to a specific size. Just, you know, however they come off the tree is generally how I leave them. Every once in a while I'll have to make a few cuts. By the way, this weed is one of my worst weeds, and it absolutely thrives in mulch and under cardboard. So now that I'm seeing this weed, I'm actually rethinking the cardboard here. It would be better to have grass around the raised bed and just keep it weed whacked and mowed really short than to have this type of weed popping up. So that's already concerning me. This cardboard's been here about a week, and you can already see this Sida weed, which spreads via underground rhizomes. It loves cardboard. So maybe I should actually not put this cardboard down at this point, but I suppose it's too late. Yeah, I guess it is too late, isn't it? Anyway, so in order to fill this, I try to use all the small branches from the tree. This was oak. I think oak is a great choice. I think almost any wood is a fine choice for building raised beds, with the exception of pine. If you have to use pine, which I've done before, certain crops tend to do better than others. I guess the pine has a lot of resin in it that some crops don't necessarily like. I've successfully grown, you know, tomatoes and peppers and most of your standard garden crops in raised beds made out of pine. but I'm not necessarily sure how well like lettuce or certain salad greens would do if the pine logs were fresh and still leaking sap. But if pine's all you got, that's probably still better than spending a bunch of money on lumber. And so I fill these mainly with leaves and oak pieces, limbs, twigs, debris. And then I recently chopped down a large crop of cowpeas, black-eyed peas, and I went ahead and took all the cowpea vines and threw all that in here. That was green material a couple weeks ago, but most of that nitrogen is probably gone now, and it's mostly carbon now. But you can see all the green bean cowpea vines. There's still some cowpeas in here. But yeah, I mean, legumes are a great choice to put in a raised bed because you're going to be putting a good bit of nitrogen in there. If you had pea vines, green bean vines, cowpea vines, anything like that should do fine. And you can see I got a decent chunk of this raised bed completely full just by using twigs, stems, small branches, and then the cowpea vines were a significant chunk of the volume. And yeah, that's going to break down over time, and the level of the soil is going to drop. But you know, I tend to top off most of my raised beds once a year anyway. So yeah, if you don't have trees that need pruning, you can generally drive around neighborhoods, especially in the fall and spring, and find plenty of logs, you know, that are at the curb where other people had trees removed or trees pruned. You can also ask people, you know, if you see trees that look like they need pruning, get you a chainsaw or a pole saw. I do a lot of it with just a handsaw. So there's plenty of free wood out there, unless you're in like a desert or something. But in most parts of the country, there's no shortage of free wood, and sometimes people have to pay to have wood like this hauled off. So a lot of people will be glad to give you free logs. And like I said, the fresher the logs, the better. I don't use any stakes or anything to hold them in place. I just kind of look at the logs, and like I said, I put the heavier ones on the bottom on the edges and then stack lighter logs on top, and it always turns out fine. I'm going to show you, I guess, 2 or 3 more raised beds that were also built with logs that are already productive. I forgot to show y'all my free fertilizer. I talked about how I use oak limbs and logs for the wood, use leaves, debris, twigs, sticks for most of the volume. And then for fertilizer, I got all kinds of green beans and their shells. And then I probably have 6 months of coffee grounds and eggshells saved up. Coffee grounds and eggshells are great fertilizer. That's actually some mustard seeds there. Those probably should have gone in later, but so yeah, I mean, if you're trying to garden and you don't want to be breaking the bank, there's ways to do this affordably. You know, if I wanted to spend more time and effort on this, I could crush up all these eggshells and coffee grounds and smooth things out a little bit more, but alright, like I said, I got 20-something raised beds, and I'm not too particular about how I build the new ones. If it's your first raised bed or your only raised bed, you might want to spend a little bit more time and effort than I'm doing, mixing everything up real good and all that, but I don't really need any more raised beds. I just, every time I have the oak trees pruned or trimmed, I just have all them logs I got to do something with, so. But anyway, so that's my fertilizer, and then I'm just going to throw a little tiny bit of compost on top, and we'll be good to plant stuff. So this is just a, I guess, a 4x4, maybe it's closer to 5x5 raised bed here, and this was also built out of oak limbs. Mostly filled with leaves. I do put a light layer of compost or potting mix on top just because you can't really direct sow seeds into a pile of leaves. But yeah, I mean, this is a little bit smaller than the one we just looked at, but it's got an olive tree in it. It's got some strawberries that are having their runner's root. There's some leeks back there, and there's a ton of zinnias. This here would have probably cost, I don't know, 80 or $100 in lumber, and then probably would have taken 15 bags of compost, garden soil, potting mix to fill. This one here, a little bit narrower, a little bit longer. This is probably a 6x4 raised bed. Again, I just work with whatever size logs I have. I don't try to cut them into specific lengths. I just, whatever logs I have available are what I use. This has some tomatoes and some zinnias. This one's not quite as high off the ground as the first two we looked at. I have a couple more. So this one, a lot of the limbs were kind of curved, so you can see this is less of a square. This is more of like almost an oval in some spots. This is probably 6 by 5, something like that, maybe 7 by 5. It's got peppers, eggplant, zinnias in it. It's unfortunately in full shade, so it's not producing great, but it'd be fine for herbs. And this is another one that was just put in this year. So the first 3 I showed you are all less than 6 months old, all new wood. This one here is like 3 or 4 years old. You can see the different color of the wood there. So these have, you know, been subject to multiple years of rain and heat. You can see they're starting to chip away at some point, but just because the logs start to disintegrate after 3 or 4 years doesn't necessarily mean all your soil's just gonna erode away. Even with heavy rains, like I said, as long as you have crops planted, their roots are gonna do a good job of holding a lot of things in place. This definitely needs weeding. There's tons of weeds in here, but there's basil and some sweet potatoes and some more zinnias in here. And anyway, I just wanted to show you the difference between the expensive bed built with lumber from the store versus the free raised beds just with logs and filled with leaves and wood. The drier climate you're in, the longer these are going to last. I'm in an extremely wet, humid climate with regular rainfall, so these probably aren't going to last more than 4 or 5 years, and then the frame will start to disintegrate, but that's not really a huge deal. Like I said, as long as there's crops in there, their roots will generally hold the soil in place. So yeah, that's the difference between free raised beds made out of logs as well as the one bed that I did make out of fancy lumber. But yeah, so make your raised beds for free if you can.